Do we have free will? The classic question. I used to think that we have free will, but after listening to Sam Harris, I've changed my mind. So I'm going to talk about how the concept of what he says has made me understand more about why I'm motivated to do things, and how it's made me less stressed about what happens in life, and how it helps me to not be as annoyed with anything or anyone. So Sam Harris is a neuroscientist who I've been listening to for years. So he's written a book about free will. He's got an app, a podcast where he talks about a range of things to do with neuroscience, psychology, philosophy. So his argument is, even though it feels very strongly like we decide to do everything we do not have free will. So he supports the opposite of free will, which is determinism. So everything is predetermined. So basically the Big Bang set off a chain of events, like one domino knocking over another, all the way up to present day. So everything that happens now is a result of everything that's happened before. So in your life, your next action is decided by all of your past experiences. And everything you've done today has just been a chain reaction of events up until right now, where you're watching this video. Essentially, his argument is you didn't pick your genes and you didn't pick the environment that you were raised in. And those are the main things that shape how we behave. So there's no free will in doing what you want, because what you want is a product of prior events that you had no hand in creating. So the first response that I had to this is, if everything is predetermined, then why should I do anything? So why don't I just sit back, relax, and just see what happens? But he addresses this point saying it's fatalism, which is the idea that the future will be whatever it's going to be, regardless of what we think and what we do. He says it don't make sense, yeah, because if, say for example, you actually try to sit there and literally do nothing, like pause now and try it if you want, eventually you would be compelled to do something. So doing nothing will eventually become a lot harder than doing something. So there are motivations within you to act, but these come to you rather than you choosing them. So fatalism is the viewpoint of a lazy victim, rather than a more powerful way to view it, which is there's no resistance behind what you're internally motivated to do. So that thought of I shouldn't do anything because there's no free will is actually the resistance that I've placed on myself doing something. So he says you don't decide your next action the same way you don't decide your next thought. If you had free will, you'd be able to choose to stop your thoughts. So not only can you not stop your thoughts, you don't choose what your next thought is going to be. You don't choose your next thought before it appears in your head. It just pops into your head. If you could choose your next thought, it would mean that you'd have to think that thought before you think it. It took me a few turns to understand that. So if you could think your next thought, you'd have to think of it before you actually think of it. So the thought experiment that he does to help with this is, think of a film. Yeah, take as long as you need. You can pause the video if you want. Have you thought of one? Now scrap that. Think of another film. Right, take as long as you need again. Pause the video if you want. Comment below what you thought of. So I thought of The Matrix and Gremlins. So let's imagine this circle is every film that exists, and there's a portion of these films that I couldn't have chosen because I don't know them, and there's another portion which are the films that I know. So from these films that I know of, there's films that I didn't think of at the time and films that I did think of at the time. So with the films that I didn't think of, so there were other films that didn't come into my mind at the time, like Gremlins 2, Toy Story, Joker, Memento. So was I free to choose those films that didn't occur to me? No. So why at that time did The Matrix and Gremlins come into my head? Right, it could be because it was completely random. But a film coming up in your mind at random is the opposite of free will. And thinking about my decision more deeply, it wasn't random. I think it was to do with being the product of subconscious processes that I weren't aware of. So for example, The Matrix is my favourite film. When he said think of a film, that one immediately came to mind. And I've been using a lot of Gremlins gifs on WhatsApp recently, so that's why Gremlins came to mind. So for me it shows it wasn't a free choice, it wasn't random, but it was deterministic. The same way you can't choose what your next thought is, I couldn't choose what film came into my head. So that was an example where it was easy for me to see why I chose Gremlins in The Matrix. But in other decisions in life that you have to make, I think most of the time it's a factor of loads of different reasons why you make your decisions, which aren't all immediately available for you to see or be aware of. So another point he makes is understanding that we don't have free will means that you can never truly hate someone for their actions. One thought experiment he does for how to forgive anyone is to think of someone that you hate. Think of someone who did something bad to you, someone that you really don't like. They might not have done anything bad to you either, just someone that you hate, someone that you really don't like. And it might be someone that you know or someone that you don't know, like a politician or someone like that. So if you hate someone, it's saying that they had the free will to behave differently than they did. So it's perfectly understandable and natural to hate someone if they do and say things which harm other people. It's understandable, it's natural, but it's not rational. Whereas compassion is rational. So viewing that person as a child who went through a sequence of actions throughout their life that were in an environment that they had no ultimate control over. There were a whole list of things that happened to that person that made them who they are today. And they ended up where they are because of a chain reaction of events that you can't see. So for me, that's changed my perception of people, for example, in prison. So to be clear, I think people in prison should be there, but not because they were responsible for their actions, but they should be in prison for the safety of society, right, to keep dangerous people off the streets. So the sad truth for me is that they're not responsible for their actions, but they are responsible for the consequences of their actions. And it's sad because it means that they've just been very unlucky. So as well as other people, yeah, it's made me more forgiving to myself. So for example, I try to be strict on what time I go to bed, what time I wake up. So for me, yeah, my health is the top priority in my life. So anything that can help with that, I'm trying to do. So for example, sleeping for 9 hours is my goal. So I try and get into bed at 11 and wake up at 8. But loads of times I don't do it. I'm just too busy doing other stuff. And then I can get annoyed at myself, especially like the next day, where if I feel tired, then I'm like, why didn't I just go to bed when I knew I wanted to? But I feel like, yeah, the reason why I get annoyed at myself is actually a mechanism to help me stop repeating that behavior in the future. But I've realized that I don't need to be angry at myself. I just need to acknowledge the behavior, and you can separate being angry at yourself and understanding that you need to behave differently in the future. For me, there were times where I felt like I had to be angry at myself if I wanted to improve, but it's not necessary at all. So I wanted to keep this vid short because I think it's a lot to process, especially if you haven't heard the argument before. So I'm gonna split this into 2 videos. So in the next video, I'm gonna talk about how it's made me more motivated, and I'm gonna talk about some counter arguments that I've been grappling with, like my conscious mind has free will and my subconscious mind doesn't. And also I'm gonna talk about how this relates to Bitcoin. So subscribe if you want to see that. So if you got something useful out of the video, I appreciate it if you like it. If you know someone that would like this video as well, you're welcome to share it with them. If you don't do any of that, don't worry, because ultimately you had no control of whether you were going to do it or not.